Welcome to Church History 401CH. Welcome to Chapter 8. Does baptism work if the priest is a fraud? It's got to be a good one for us to have a little look at. We will get to that in a moment. Let me just nip via a couple of books. Paul Foster's Early Christian Thinkers. So if you're at all inclined towards doing an assignment that's got an early church history bent to it, Paul Foster's an excellent writer anyway. But if you've worked out who it is you're writing on, you might want to have a flick through here. Who were the Church Fathers? Excellent book here. One of the cheat things you can do is look on something like Google Books, and sometimes they will let you search through a book, and if you type your the saint that you're writing about into that, you might be able to sort of see enough with some of these things. Frances Young, she's written this amazing book, and I haven't read that much of it, but I have dipped into it for different parts where I've needed it for different essays that I've written. Yes, this is very good as a solid. But what you will find, of course, in your bookshops is all sorts of different small books. So here's a small book, Augustine and His World, and this is it's a sort of thin book. It's a sort of summary about Augustine and his position, and you'll be able to get hold of simple thin books like that quite simply, quite cheaply, if you're writing an Augustine essay. If you're not writing an Augustine essay, don't get it. Alright, sorry about my phone just there. And of course, St. Augustine's Confessions. You absolutely should get this, and you should certainly read this at some point over your training period. Doesn't need to be that translation or author or anything. Doesn't even say which particular translator this one. This one is by Pine Coffin. Fine. Really? That's a terrible name. Okay, don't worry about that. Get yourself a copy of St. Augustine's Confessions. I don't mind who translates it, who publishes it, what have you. But go for it. Chapter 8. Does baptism work if the priest is a fraud? And here we come to look at the conversion of St. Augustine. Lessons to be learned from the Donatists. And Pelagius, the art of grace and the art of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. To a large extent, this is from page 58 onwards. No idea how those page numbers will work by the time we get to the January version of the PDF, but this kind of flows in its own way. You could just sit down and read this probably quicker than I can give this talk, because it flows straightforwardly. Augustine, born 354 in North Africa. His father was a pagan called Patricius, and he's got mother Monica, key woman. We'll have a bit more of her in a moment. And Augustine is he's the giant who stands on the shoulders of these other giants. He's a tremendous writer, prolific writer, and one who has shaped Western theology more than any other. I think we can confidently say that. His writings on the Confessions it's astonishing in terms of it being written so far before cogito ergo sum from Descartes. But here you've got this strong sense of the individual and of his sense of sin and what he got up to, and the pear tree where he steals all these pears, the story that you've got there. But for him, his journey has been to do with the problem of suffering and exploring what that's all about, and the problem of evil. And he went via various different positions. The Manichees seemed to hold his attention for quite a while. And there, the solution to the problem of suffering, the reason why there is suffering, is because stuff exists. We are spirit, and we need to be liberated from this stuff. And so it's because of this stuff that we have this problem. Now, he's looking at the problem of evil, theodicy, which I'm sure you'll have a unit on at some stage or other. And his conclusion was the answer to the problem of evil was that evil is an imperfection of goodness. Evil has no separate existence. It's merely a corruption of goodness. And so that's where Augustine ended up. You'll be familiar with that if you've read any C.S. Lewis, because that's really his view and position. Now, he is keen on the on rhetoric and that style of teaching, and so he takes a job in Rome. He moves from Rome. He moves from Africa to Rome, and then from Rome to Milan. And his mum Monica goes with him, and he has he's taken to himself a concubine. We never know her name, and lots of scholars and ah about, well, why don't we learn her name? And the nicest answer I've come across is because he wants to protect her from the paparazzi. He wants to hide her from the scholars. They have a child together, Adeodatus, a gift of God. So there is quite a deep love, I suggest, between Augustine and his concubine. And Monica is constantly praying for her son Augustine, and they go to Milan, and she works very hard at going to church there, where Ambrose is bishop. And she tells Augustine, you've got to come along and hear this guy, because he knows rhetoric like nobody else, and you like rhetoric, and you will love this guy's preaching. Come along and hear him. And so this is where Ambrose becomes a key part of the conversion of Augustine. But he writes in his own confessions, he writes of tolle lege, pick it up and read it. And so this is this moment of conversion where he just feels he hears some child shouting tolle lege, pick it up and read it, and he interprets this as meaning God is telling him to pick up his Bible. He picks up Romans, he opens it, and he reads, what does he read? Not in the ways of banqueting and drunkenness, in immoral living and sensualities, passion and rivalry, but clothe yourself in the Lord Jesus and make no plans to glut thy body's lusts. And so for him, this is his conversion moment. He's baptized 387, and Monica, Augustine, and Adeodatus return to Africa. The concubine got sent home and sent away earlier. On the way home, Monica dies, and within 2 years, Adeodatus has died, a teenager. And then passing through the town of Hippo, the people demand that Augustine be priested, and then later he's made bishop. Now, one of the issues that he comes across is the issue of the Donatists, and I wonder if it shows that I'm really very thoroughly Anglican in terms of how I go about telling you about the Donatists, because I did hear a Baptist minister talking about the Donatists, and I went, that is really not how I would have sold it. He was selling the Donatists really positively, whereas I won't be. I won't be. So, rewind in your mind right back to 303 and the Diocletian persecution, the great persecution. And at that moment where some people don't know whether to be tragitores or whether to be confessors. And, some people didn't make the right decisions. And one of those who didn't make the right decision was a bishop, and he went from there to carry on being a bishop and making more bishops. Now, there was a view that there was a guy called Donatus, and he felt that the church should be pure. And what this bishop had done was wrong, and he shouldn't have done it. Cecilian of Carthage, there you go, couldn't find his name there. Cecilian of Carthage. What he did was wrong, and so Donatus said, I'm going to set me up a pure church, and that's what we're going to work with. And so following from there had been all these, had been this separate church, separated from the established church, if you like, the Catholic Church, if you like. There is no sense of Roman Catholic at this point. All right, there's just one universal church. And so there's this schism. Now it's a schism because it's not a heresy. These guys believe the same creeds. They sing the same hymn books. We think they decorated their churches differently, but it's in every sense it's the same. But they have broken away from this. Is a schism, not a heresy. And the The Donatists then had gone on and they'd grown their churches and they'd grown their churches. And they viewed the Catholic Church as being really, from this point forward, from Cecilian of Carthage, everybody that Cecilian of Carthage had ordained, well, they weren't really ordained, because Cecilian was a traitor to the faith. So how can you say that that person that he's gone and ordained, he got ordained by a fake bishop? That doesn't count. You can't get ordained by a fake bishop. And so they viewed the entire line. We're talking now about 100 years worth of the church since then as just being fake and unacceptable in the eyes of the Donatist church. And Augustine came along and said, it's not about me, it's about God. I'm not the one who makes it right and makes it pure. It is God through me who makes it right and makes it pure. It's not about me. And so baptism is valid because it is God who does the baptizing. Yes, he uses me, but it's God who does the baptizing. Indulge yourselves for a moment in transubstantiation. It is God who does the meaningful act to the bread and the wine, not me. So he argued differently that Cecilian of Carthage, yes, he was a traitor, fine, but it didn't nullify the church and the ordinations that had gone on prior to that. And so it was about seeing, and this is hugely liberating. Those of you who get to church and you've spent the previous half hour shouting at your kids to get themselves ready so that we're ready to go, or you've had some sort of blazing row with your better half, and there you are, you're there and you're ready to take the service, and you're all smiley and happy and Jesus-y and everything, and yet there's a part of you that just goes, I'm really not, I'm a little bit not who I should be and where I should be. And so there's that part of you that's like that. Now Augustine says, don't worry about it, that happens, and it is God working through you that makes this moment you're doing this christening, that makes this christening. It is not you being pure and holy. Now if you looked and read your Didache carefully, there was a mixed view there as you came to christenings. The Didache said, you as baptizer and me as baptizee, we should both fast. I should fast in preparation for my baptism. You should fast as you prepare to baptize me. Now we get to Augustine. I'm sure he'd be encouraging fasting, but for him it is God who does the work, not us. And this is going to be clear and important throughout all of what he is about. He tries very hard to get the Donatists to join up with the Catholics. He fails. He tries using force. It fails and it backfires. It's not a good part of our history. And there you go. It's quite sad. The Donatists. Pelagius. Now Pelagius, I wonder if Pelagius and Augustine ever sat down, had a cup of tea. They could have just said, fair point, see what you're saying. So they never do actually meet, but you can't help wonder what would have happened if they did meet and just shared a few thoughts and points about things. Pelagius has this idea that the fall, Adam eating the apple, wasn't that big a deal. And so this is the key elements, the key difference between Pelagius and Augustine. Pelagianism is that heresy that says you can pretty much save yourself just by pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. Okay? And for Pelagius, the fall wasn't that big a deal. And so because it's not that big a deal, God's salvation is only a bit of a big deal. Whereas for Augustine, the fall was a huge deal. And as a result of that, the salvation is a huge deal as he sees the grace of God. And so that's the key question here. How big was the fall? It's not that big a deal. I mean, everybody eats apples. What's the problem? It was going to happen. Let's just get over it. The apple eating, it was just an Adam thing. Adam and Eve. 100% of all humanity at the time. But let's just pretend it wasn't. It's just two people eating. Only two people got it wrong. Why should the rest of us? It's got nothing to do with us. So this is Pelagius's view that the fall wasn't that big a deal. You got a couple of others who are part of this story, Celestius, Julian of Aclanum, who are tucked into this. But the key element is this understanding of the fall. Now, Pelagius, he's in favour of grace, but his understanding of grace is pretty darn close, as I see it, to God helps those who help themselves. All right? So I've got an electric bicycle. When people say, "What's your electric bicycle like?" I say, "It's Pelagian," which turns out not to be very funny unless you kind of get that. But if I pedal a little bit, this battery will give me a lot of oomph. It is not a motorbike. That would be Augustine's view of grace. You sit on it and you open the throttle up and away you go. This, if you help yourself, God helps those who help themselves. It's that kind of idea. Not from the Bible, curiously, but its origin, I think, is from the Greek tragedies. Heaven doesn't help people who wait for help themselves. Now, although there's a Quranic verse that's quite similar, but it's not in the scripture. So for Pelagius, it was, come on, take a bit of responsibility for your own salvation. All right, What are you doing? You could make a little effort here to be a nicer person. You could get out of your bad habits. You could exert some level of self-control, self-discipline. Come on. And what God will do is, for every good deed you do, God will be right there with you, and it will give you a little extra push, and well done you for making an effort. So you can see why, actually, a lot of us end up being Pelagian, semi-Pelagian, and I think it's probably the heresy of the Church of England. But Augustine wanted to say, no, this is all gift, and it's God's goodness, and it's God's grace, and it's not by works, and it is by grace, and this is all wonderful stuff. So I'm now on to page 66, where we see Augustine's view of original sin, and how far we have fallen. And we're part of this. We are in the loins of Adam, and so this fall is part of us. We have a loss of God's grace. We have a loss of paradise. We have a predisposition to sin, and we have inherited guilt from those who have gone before us. So our fall is huge indeed. But grace comes in Augustine. Grace is this unmerited. Grace comes first. Grace is this thing that goes before us, prevenient grace. And it's that moment that makes us begin to have an inklings of curiosity about faith and whether I might think about going to an Alpha course or something. Operative grace is that work of God that helps me to start to have faith in God. Cooperating grace, this is this process of sanctification. As I have faith in Jesus and God's grace works in me and makes me into the person that God has made me to be. And so we are yet to see completed grace as God's gift of perseverance works its work in me. So there you go. How big is your fall? Because if it's a small fall, you might as well be Pelagian. Whereas if you have a big view of the fall, then we see in God a much bigger view of salvation and of grace. Good for your sermons here is this understanding of grace. So if I were to tell you that justice is getting what you deserve, and mercy is not getting what you deserve, so grace is getting what you don't deserve. That's grace for you. Now we will see the church move from enjoying Augustine's position really to ending up with the compromise of being semi-Pelagian, or if you prefer it, semi-Augustinian. Doesn't really matter too much which way round you view it. And it's about this working out this balance of how much responsibility do I have for my own salvation. How do I balance that out? How much of it is the responsibility is still with me and how much of it is still with God? Augustine's very clear. It's just that we, I think, struggle to be so. That was section 8. Does baptism work if the priest is a fraud, and I hope you were comforted with my answer. We move now into chapter 9 as we come to see how did the Gospels come to these shores. I will see you shortly.